You're very welcome to Faith Matters, Conversion Stories of Hope. My guest today is from Italy. As a child and young boy, he suffered immensely. Sadly, the suffering was inflicted by his own parents. He found his refuge in drugs, and by the time he was an adolescent, he was on heroin. He built up quite a business as a drug dealer, moving between France, Holland, and Italy. In fact, he left the business, so his life was under threat, and he finished up destitute and ill, living in a train station in Turin. That he's alive today is a real miracle, an extraordinary miracle. He now lives in Mayo, and it's a true privilege for me to introduce you to Davide Barbieri. Davide, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
David, thank you very much for inviting me. I praise the Lord for the gift that God has given you to interview people like myself that had a tough life, but through prayer and the intervention of God and His Blessed Mother, rediscover the gift of life. So, David, my life started in a small village, South Italy, south of Turin, 25 miles south of Turin. Turin is the city of Juventus, the football team, or Fiat, the manufactured car. Small farming village, 10,000 souls, very parish, like similar to an Irish village. I was the firstborn from my mom and dad, well, joyfully expected by the story I heard when I grew up from my aunts and uncles and grannies and and granddads, because I was the first, we say, grandson in that family. Life for me, it was joyful as a child as I can remember. But from the age of the child, got an understanding of 5, maybe, 4 or 5 years old, my parents didn't love each other. I know this today because I have matured, I suffer. And when I look back at my, young age, I never saw my father embracing my mother kissing my father, holding hands, having, gentle conversation. Like should be from a husband and a wife with a newborn baby. Like, I don't know why, I know today, I didn't know when I was a child. There was a lot of sadness in my family. My parents, thought my father said he's a Catholic, but he was voting for the Communist Party. So I don't know how much Catholic there was in that. My mother suffered all her life, since I remember as a child, of manic depression. And so she was self-medicating herself. She was going into the Catholic faith, Christianity, Buddhism, New Age. So she was very confused and broken. My dad was a hard-working man. One thing I learned from my dad today, I can thank him for that, is to work hard, because you have to work hard to protect your family and to provide for your family. But one thing I learned myself, you have to love your family. My father didn't love us when we were young. Beating was part of the education I received. I remember many times, my mom and dad finding an argument between themselves. They will take it off myself and my youngest brother as well. My youngest brother is 2 years younger than me. Unfortunately, he died in 2023 of heroin overdose. He never found sobriety in his life. He was 50 years old. And, it's very, very sad, but also an happiness for me, because I always journey with him, with my prayer, with my, children, with my wife. And at the end of the day, God has chosen a different path for him. He didn't believe in God. He was very angry, very disturbed, and very lost. But today I know he's at peace. Whatever God has decided for him was God's will. I know he took an overdose. I don't know if it was. He has said he wanted to do that, or it was an accident, but he's gone. He's not here. As I come back, the lack of love made me grow with, trust issue. When school started, and that's where the serious, we say, the beating started too. in the sense like I don't know where the expectation of my parents. We were only kids, and we were. I was beaten on a daily basis. You know what I mean? From an early age, like we say, 5, 6 years old. So my mom broke both of my arms with a shovel, with the handle of a shovel, beating me up, and she cracked a couple of my ribs. She broke me head with one of those sandals, the wooden sandal that we wear in the summer in Italy. She cracked a few of my teeth. And that's was the environment. My father worked very hard to provide for us, so financially we were okay. There was no issues regarding the bickering or the agitation in the family. So in that environment, I learned one things that we say made who I am, who I was. It was like not trust anyone, not trust from the start. When situation at the table raise up, and my mother and my father many times I said we should have aborted you. You know what I mean? From a small, early age, you know what I mean? You're only a waste of space. You're not good to nothing. You're not good at school. You know what I mean? When your parents say things like that to you, and because they're your main carer, you start believing to it. You start to believe that you're no good. So what's the point to be good? When, you know what I mean? That's the attitude that you receive from who has been given to you by God to be your caring, your loving, you know what I mean? So like, little examples, of a childhood, terrified of the Saturday, because my father was away all week working. So my mother was running the house, and she was very disciplinary. She was, suffered from manic depression from an early age herself. And the reason I learned when I had my conversion, but heavy medicated, self-medicating herself. And the Saturday for me were the dreading, because my father was coming back from work on a Saturday afternoon. In Italy, in Saturday morning, you used to go to school. So I remember always, to get the bus to go back home from school. And I will never get off my stop. I'll go until the end and then walk home, because I knew when I was coming home, there was serious consequences, because the full week review will be given to my father, and my father will take over physically and beat me up. So, do you know what I mean? Fear, growing up in fear, growing up in lack of belief in yourself and fear of dying. Really, someday they're gonna kill me. These people are gonna kill me or kill my brother. And I start to close up. I start not speaking to anyone. I used to go to school and have a mask, live a double life. I will never had sold my parents to anyone. So for every one that I used to meet, my friends and people like that, they were not welcome to come to my house. Otherwise, they will discover the reality. But I always say, my mom and dad were the best parents I ever had. And that was a big lie. You know what I mean? And all the pain, all the abuse, physical and emotional, was suppressed in my stomach, in my brain. So in school, I wasn't great, definitely, because I couldn't concentrate, living in fear. And then I became a little bit wild myself, because I believe I wasn't good. And I hooked up with some of the kids. So I started playing soccer. I was good. And I let the anger out on the football pitch. And I played professionally for one season. And the sad part is that drugs and alcohol became a companionship of my life from an early age, from the age of 11, 10, start drinking cans after the training. And then hash was everywhere in Italy at the time. And, hash became also a companion, and hash will take away, we say, the worry and the pain and put you in this kind of a second, a different reality. And then
what is ash, Davide?
Ash, marijuana, hashish is like it's like marijuana. You know what I mean? You smoke it. I don't know what they call it in Ireland. It's ash, but people that will listen will know what I'm talking about. If people are taking drugs, they will understand what I'm saying. And at the age of like 13 and a half, I found love, in a sense, a group of guys older than me. You know what I mean? And very cool guys, you know, everybody loved in town. He introduced me to heroin, and nobody's snorting it or smoking it, injecting heroin, you know, from an early age. And heroin was the key to suppress and find freedom from my pain, from my worry, from my fear. So I started to rebel at home. I remember, you know, having fight with my dad very early, you know what I mean? I wouldn't take it anymore. I wouldn't take it from them anymore. So I will rebel. And at the age of 14, I actually left home and played football. I went to school. I trained as a cook. And then at 16 years old, I went to Amsterdam to work in a restaurant as a cook. And that's where my addiction went really bad. So I have to say, you know, I was blaming my parents for who I was. It was their fault, you know, because I never received love. I never received guidance. I never see my father on the side of the football pitch cheering me up, say, you know, look at what, you know, even when I was doing something good, I never heard, you were great, fair play to you, you know, well done, son, well done. No, it was always negative, it was always bad. And also blaming my mom and dad, but also blaming all my relatives, my aunts, my uncles, my grannies, because they all knew what was going on. The truth was in the family was real because we were black and blue. You know, I used to go to school with black eyes and stuff like that, and telling, you know, I hurt myself playing in the yard. I fell, and you know, like if I was stupid, you know, but just to masquerade. But my relatives all knew, and I really resented that because I spoke to them in later age, and I say, why none of you has intervened? Do you know what I mean? Why none of you has came over to the family and said, this, we need to take away these children. These children are in danger. They are, you know what I mean? But at the time they didn't. So unfortunately, what I became in my heavy addiction, it wasn't my fault. It was their fault. So I was self-justified to live a life of drug addiction and loneliness, alone, not trusting, not be able to love anyone, because that's what I learned. And liar, a big liar, because that's what I learned at home. My mother used to bring me to the hospital. In example, when she broke the arms of myself, you know, a small village like smaller than Wexford, you know what I mean? There's only one hospital, one emergency department. And if you're calling every month with something's broken, the ribs, the arms, the head, and your mother will say, tell the doctor you fell from the bike, you fell playing football. So the doctor are not stupid. Do you know what I mean? And my mother taught me how to lie to get away. So she was getting away, not me. And I couldn't really, you know what I mean? You became like codependent to your parents. You wouldn't sell your parents. You wouldn't say to the doctor, no, sorry, my mother is beating me up. My mother is doing this and that and the other. Because I believe deep in my heart, there was a bit of love towards them. Otherwise, I would have said. But I was also codependent because I was a child. And I knew if I done that, I might get killed when I go home. So the reality of a young age kid knowing that if he said the truth, could depend of the future of his life. Because if they done that to me, only by, you know what I mean, bringing, you know, having a bad report from school or being noisy in the house, playing football or playing with my brother and get beaten up. Like, you know what I mean? You can expect anything. So a lot of trade, we say trade, and a lot of my character was formed by those early experience with my parents. I did receive a lot of love from my grandparents. I have to say that. I can't hide that. And still today, they're all dead. And I am grateful for the love I received from them when I was able to escape from home and spend a few days in their home, you know, in their houses with them. So I was very grateful to that. So from Amsterdam, my addiction went spiral. So heroin became part of my life every day. Cocaine entered as well in my life. And any things that I could put my hands on became part of my life. But I also, when I was there for a year and a half, I used to buy cocaine and heroin from other Italians that lived in Amsterdam, like adults Italian that lives in Amsterdam.
Davide,
Yeah,
all this time you were in your village, or had you gone to Torino? Had gone to Turin?
when I when I was with my parents, I lived with my parents in the village. And then when I decided to get out, I went first to Amsterdam. So that was my exit from home. Okay. That was my escape from home from my parents. First was a year and a half in Amsterdam. I'll give you a little bit. A year and a half in Amsterdam. Then I moved from Amsterdam to Paris to again working as a cook. I worked in Paris for like 9 months. Then I came back home. I had my own little place. The next village, not in the village where my parents live, in the next village. At a very young age in Italy, at this, we're talking about the beginning of the 80s, mid 80s, like, you know what I mean? When you were 15, 16 in Italy, you were not a kid anymore. You were an adult, like, you know what I mean? So, and cash opened every door. Do you know what I mean? When you had a lot of cash in your pocket, nobody asked many questions. So at the end of the day, that was my life. So I spent some time in 1 year and a half in Amsterdam, 9 months in Paris, and then I went to Spain on south of Portugal in a region called Cadiz, and I worked there as a cook as well. And then I come back home, and when I come back home, I lived maybe next village, maybe like 10 kilometers from my village, and I used to go to the same pub in my village, and this pub was ran by people from the southern part of Italy, okay? And I knew there were no honest people. I knew that they were dealing no drugs. They were, they were serious criminals. And one evening, to the owner of the pub, I was sharing that I was in Amsterdam, and I said to him, "You have 2 sons, and I know them very well, and they look a bit stupid to me." And I said, "I know some people that can make you very wealthy. So if you agree to send your 2 sons with me in Holland, I'll introduce them to these people and see what we can do." So I became a drug trafficker for this family. And I used to bring huge amount of drugs that destroyed my life and destroyed the life of so many young people around my area that, only God can. I feel forgiven today because I ask forgiveness to the Lord, but I also am aware of the destruction that I brought with that substance. So I live a life of criminality for maybe 11 years, like serious criminality. So I had a gun in my back pocket all the time. I used to drive a car with no license. I used to buy license. In Italy, you can buy a license for £1,000. You buy a license, and because drugs make you rich, you make a lot of money from drugs. You had access to a lot of stuff, power. So my parents used to inflict fear into me. So I became like them. In a very strange way, drugs, addiction, loneliness, anger. I became like my parents because I was very feared person in my village. A lot of people were afraid. They wouldn't speak to me because I was very aggressive. It put me in a place in society where people will respect you because they know that if they don't, something's going to happen to them. And I lived that life for a very long time. And that life wasn't what I was planning when I was a child, but it was okay at the time. I was so blind. I was so empty that I was just searching for the next good things that's going to come. And the only things I knew that I was a bad person. So it was okay to live a life like that. It was okay to be a drug dealer. It was okay to be a criminal. It was okay. It was okay because that's what I believed at the time. So that life brought a lot of trouble to me. Like, you know what I mean? Like with police and things like that. So with other people. And that's why I used to carry gun, because the amount of drugs that I brought through this family into that area, you were not just afraid of the police, and we have different police in Italy, so you were also afraid of other family that will come and get you out, because they want the business themselves. So that's a life I lived for a very long time. When you think 11 years, that's a long time, waking up on your own, going to bed on your own. I was never promiscuous. One thing the Our Lady maybe did in my life, and I can say it today, I was never promiscuous. I think I had two girlfriends on until I stopped with that life. But I wasn't very promiscuous. I couldn't care less. I wouldn't trust a woman. I hated my mother, so I wouldn't have any feeling to start a relationship with a woman because I could see my mother, the way maybe she speaks, the way that maybe she acts. It would just make me more angry. And so a life of loneliness, a life of, you know what I mean, of a daily basis, like, living 5 lives. Sometimes I didn't know who I was because you carry maybe 3 or 4 passports with same picture, different names, different address. It was crazy. It was crazy. And once a week, I have to go to Amsterdam. So one time you got the train from Turin, another time you get it from Milan, and you see the route were always different. So it was a very, very fast. I was living in a fast lane. I had plenty of money, David, plenty. I didn't know what to do with. I never washed my clothes. I remember I was living in Turin at that stage. We say between maybe when I was 18, 19, 20, I was living in a hotel. And because I had plenty of money, I can pay. I wouldn't know, waste my money and, pack my bag and go to a laundrette and wash my clothes. I just sell them and go to a shop and buy new clothes. It was just a life of excess, no explanation. But honestly, I couldn't care less what was going on around me. Couldn't care less. So I couldn't see anything else than myself. So for 11 years, heroin was my companionship every day, every single day.
What was your health like?
Oh, like not just because the heroin, you can imagine the stress, the mental status, like, you know what I mean, the agitation. I used to smoke 3 packets of cigarette a day, like, you know what I mean, no sleep at night, like, you know what I mean, wandering, sometimes finding myself walking in the city of Turin, like at 4 o'clock in the morning on my own, just looking out just look, spaced out, we say, you know what I mean? Yeah, my health was very bad. I had an overdose and I fell asleep in a river. So I took so much heroin at maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, sitting beside a river in January, where temperature in January goes down to -10. And I OD and I fell with my right side of the body into the side of the river. So the water was running through my leg and my right side, okay? And I was there from, we say, 9 o'clock in the morning until they found me at 5 p.m. Only by the miracle of God. There was a gentleman taking his dog for a walk to do his business, and he saw me because he had a little torch. In Italy, at 5 p.m. is dark. And he saw me and he called the guards and he called an ambulance and they came, and I wasn't dead because I had a very heavy, say, leather jacket, the RAF, the pilot that drive aircraft, and a lot of jumper. So it protected my heart. But for a week, I was completely frozen. So all my right side was frozen. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel my arm. I couldn't move them. The water was so cold that it froze. So I was in hospital for a week. And the consequence of that, my right kidney doesn't work. There's a big stone of urine since 1990 stuck in my kidney. So I lost the function. We say if your kidney works 100%, my only work 15. So my health wasn't great. I have no veins. I didn't know, if I lifted my hands for more than 2 minutes, I don't feel nothing. I will get, like it's bad circulation, like, you know what I mean? My teeth start to fall, rotten, because the poor diet, the drink, the drugs every single day. And because you don't go to the dentist, and you couldn't care less, like, you know what I mean? So there were, a serious issue with my dental and my liver, my stomach. So you can imagine, I wasn't well physically, mentally, but still living, still going on, you know what I mean? For the grace of God, and today I say, but at the time I didn't know why.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I look forward to having you back with me at the same time next week, when I'll continue my conversation with Davide. Don't forget, you can listen back to this program and all our previous broadcasts on Finding Happiness on Spotify, YouTube, and drbhennessy.com. For now, until next week, good night and God bless.